Um, oh, yes, thank you. And then Allison.
So I'm the education director at Temple Emmanuel in Marblehead, Massachusetts, and the topic sounds really exciting and intriguing, and I'm looking forward to finding out more information about what you've been doing.
Yay, thanks for being here. And let's see, Catherine, nice to meet you.
Hi, thank you. Nice to meet you as well. I'm Catherine Carmel. I am the Director of Family Life and Learning at Temple Beth Philo in Olympia, Washington.
Cool.
And I am also the board chair of RENA. So I am here wearing both of those hats. And I am here in this group because it is the one that I have the least familiarity with.
Got it. Cool. Well, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm really glad. Nice to meet you. And Fred, hi, I see you in two windows. You're cloning yourself and
Zoom got really wonky on me all of a sudden and I couldn't unmute and I wanted to shout out, hi, old friends, but okay. So anyway, hi. Heard most of the intros, knew many of you. Fred Schwindler-Daub, Rabbi at Adat Shalom in Bethesda and longtime environmental and social justice activist. So I'm not really a RENA person, but I'm kind of RENA adjacent. So also a longtime faculty at Camp Havaya, which keeps my, connected with informal Jewish ed. Yeah.
Yay. My niece goes to Havaya and loves it so, so much. And I think my sister is still on the board, but it's a family affair with Jewish camp. So yay, great. Well, so we're going to just dive in. I'm going to give you a little context and then I actually want to walk you through the curriculum and we'll do a little bit of learning together. I've been interested in racial justice, but specifically reparations for about 6 years. And after the murder of George Floyd and the protests for Black Lives Matter, I felt called to do something local in my community around the issue of reparations. My community, Judaism Your Way, is, I call us an unshul. We're an open tent for anybody seeking Jewish connection. And we don't have any kind of membership structure and we don't have a building. We have about 15,000 people who come to an open tent in the Denver Botanic Gardens for the Chagim. And then we have about 150 students in our open tent B-Mitzvah program in Denver and Boulder. And we work with, I would say, 50 couples and families on weddings and life cycle events throughout the year. And then we have a bunch of holiday programming and tree hugging, gratitude and awe programs. And anyway, so I got the opportunity to take some time off from our B-Mitzvah program to develop some adult learning. And I knew that creating some sort of Jewish learning around teshuvah, around relational repair and racism was important. And so repair and remedy is, the product of that, at least the first go around. And then I'll also be offering something called Dismantling Racism from the Inside Out, which is being offered by the Inside Out Wisdom Project that Yehuda Webster and Rabbi David Jaffe are offering, which is another cool curriculum around racism. And anyway, so in preparation for creating this curriculum, it's a 7-week class, and it's really aimed at adults who come from, we have people with all sorts of Jewish backgrounds in this particular class. This is the second cohort that I'm leading. So about 75 people have taken this class in the past year. And all the texts are in English. I spent a lot of time interviewing folks all over the country, Black and Jewish, Black and not Jewish, and Jewish and white, who are engaged in the national conversation around reparations for slavery and systemic racial inequality. And I realized that there's no curriculum out there that really uses Jewish text and a Jewish textual approach and chavruta as a method to engage with the question of our country's unfinished business around racial inequality. And so that's why I felt like oh, Judaism has a lot to say about harm and repair. And in fact, Danya Ruttenberg just published her book, woo, that I have on my desk and haven't yet read. I'm sure that that's going to, like, a lot of material from that book is going to make it into the revision of this curriculum. And so I dove into Jewish text study to create kind of a Jewish conversation about harm and repair, and then dove into a lot of texts by Black American authors to create an ongoing, like, what is the conversation amongst Black folks around harm, around racism, and visions of repair and reparations. And I also made sure I wanted to do like a Kranjek test, which is the test to have at least a couple voices of women in any Jewish text study. So I thought I'm going to find texts from Black Jewish women to include as the bridge between the historical and evolving Jewish conversation around harm and repair and the conversation in Black communities, which are predominantly not Jewish. So we have a lot of texts in this curriculum from April Aviva Baskin and Ilana Kaufman and Yavila McCoy, and a bunch of really well-known, amazing, powerful Black Jewish women who are, I think, at the forefront of pushing the Jewish communities, plural, our Jewish communities forward on thinking about racism and inclusion and equity and justice. So that's kind of the context. I think what I'll do is, I'll pause for a second. Any questions about kind of the origin story of the curriculum before I show you the juicy juice? No, not really? Cool. All right, we're going to study some Rambam. Okay, so let me show you. Hold on. So here's the, sorry, here's the front of it. And by the way, I'm happy to share this curriculum with any of you if you're interested in learning more and maybe facilitating it. So wanted to show you, here's our table of contents and, how I've structured the course. The first thing that we do in every class is that we read out loud the touchstones, which are the core Jewish values that undergird how we develop relationships in the class with one another and how we show up within ourselves and in conversation. And we're actually going to read through those touchstones. Then we talk about building community and what does it mean to create brave spaces, which is a different sensibility than safe spaces. For historically marginalized groups, safe spaces are usually segregated, and it's only the people of that marginalized or oppressed group meeting with one another. But in cross-racial groups or in cross-sexual orientation and gender identity groups, it's often really difficult to create safe spaces because of the biases that people carry and the unintentional harm that sometimes occurs in those kinds of spaces. And so instead of using the word safe space, we talk about brave space. And that is a concept I learned from the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., which I think is a helpful distinction when we're talking about mixed groups. P.S. There have been at least 3 or 4 people of color who some identify as Jews and some don't in each of the cohorts that I've led. And that has been a very interesting racial dynamic that has emerged in the classes around like white Ashkenazi anxiety about, racism and how we're not doing enough. And I've witnessed some like deeply ingrained, what I call inherited Jewish trauma and anxiety patterns that I'm happy to talk about later if you want to, revisit that topic. I see Allison saying, yes, why I actually would. So it's a thing. And P.S. I'm going to be teaching a course in the spring called Unlearning Jewish Anxiety, which looks at those patterns and uses Dr. Judd Brewer's book called Unwinding Anxiety. So it's neuroscience and cognitive behavioral therapy to and Jewish mindfulness practices to start to notice and unlearn all of our anxiety habits that cause us suffering. Okay, advertisement over. Moving on. Sorry, very excited about that class. So the first thing that we do after building some community is we explore the impacts of harm. This is not a class that traffics in historical facts. I hope and expect that folks can do their own learning offline and not in the Zoom room about the historical, just about racism and racial inequality and segregation and Jim Crow. I have a huge reading list at the end of this curriculum if anybody wants to dive into it. And before and after each class, there's pre-reading or pre-videos to do your own learning offline, so that if people want to learn more about a particular topic, they can do that on their own. So it's sort of a flipped classroom kind of model. We talk about collective responsibility and what it means, like what the phrase from the Talmud, Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Lezeh, like all of the people who wrestle with the divine are responsible for one another. And what does that mean in an American context that privileges individualism and liberty rather than collective obligation and responsibility for practicing an ethic of care, and that those things are in tension with one another in Jewish spiritual technologies and American like civil liberties. So we talk a lot about that. And then the week that I want to actually explore with you today is about the elements of tshuva and like a process of tshuva that uses some thinking from Rambam and also some thinking from William Darity and Kirsten A. Mullen's The Path to Equality, which is an amazing book of history and policy envisioning around what would a reparations program run by the US government really look like. And that is a totally visionary document. I don't think it will ever be enacted in my lifetime, but you know, im tirtzu ein zo agada. So that is my mantra around reparations. And then we talk about apologies and what are the elements of a really effective and healing, reconciling apology. Week 6, we talk about remedies, and we actually explore the German reparations program to Holocaust survivors that helped build the state of Israel and the debate within Israel, within the Knesset about whether to accept that money. And there were many Israeli politicians at the time in the early 50s who said it's blood money and we should not accept it. And we also look at some case studies of apologies and remedies in the United States towards Japanese US citizens who were interned during World War II, and an apology by Bill Clinton to the families of descendants of the Tuskegee Syphilis Project, which was a gross violation of Institutional Review Board policies on, medicine and human ethics. And then we talk about repair and healing and what that really looks like. And it involves both vulnerability and courage to create transformative relationships in addition to policies. And that's, I think, where on the ground kind of action work between people interpersonally meets, systemic policies that might be proposed and enacted by the government. There's a vast chasm between the two, but I think you need both. It's not an either or solution. And there's a huge debate in the reparations community about like this binary thinking of, we either pursue this strategy or that strategy. And so it's just an interesting moment in that movement debate. I'm going to pause for a second and I'm going to stop the share. Questions that came up from there? Yes, I will definitely share. And Stolen Beam is awesome. Yes, it is awesome. In fact, I talked with Deborah and Jeffrey about the Stolen Beam, and it's interesting because they've got amazing resources for learning about racism, but there's not a lot of Jewish stuff in that curriculum. And I was surprised. So I think Stolen Beam and Repair and Remedy are in conversation with one another. It could be a good sequence for different congregations and communities. Should I move on, or any questions? By the way, I'm freestyling. This is my first presentation, so you're my guinea pigs, and I would love feedback. Woohoo! Okay, so I think hey, Caryn, nice to see you. So I think what I would love to do is walk through the touchstones, and then we can look at the collective tshuva, like the 4-step process that I invented, inspired by Rambam. So I would love to read out loud, and maybe I can just call on y'all and we can go through this and then debrief, like, what do you notice about these touchstones and how might they be relevant for undergirding a charged conversation around racism. So Margie, would you be willing to read number 1?
Sure. We commit to cultivating awareness of our own presence in community, conversation, and dialogue. We will strive to be active listeners as well as active participants. We will be aware of how much space we take in conversation, and we will make space for others. Who is wise? One who learns from everyone. Who is mighty? One who practices awareness of one's inclinations. Okay, a vote.
Thank you. And let's see, Allison, would you read number 2 with my favorite little quote from Talmud?
We commit to recognizing there are many right ways to understand a person, an experience, and an issue. We commit to acknowledging multiple perspectives, even when they might diverge from our own and might be hard to hear. A divine voice proclaimed, both these, the school of Shammai, and those, the school of Hillel, are the words of the living source. However, the source's will is in accordance with the opinion of the school of Hillel. Why? The reason is that they were agreeable and forbearing, showing restraint when affronted, and would teach both their own statements and the statements of the school of Shammai. Moreover, they prioritize the statements of the school of Shammai to their own, in deference to their adversaries.
Thank you. Let this be a touchstone and a shiviti for our political discourse in this country, inshallah. So let's see, Catherine, can you read number 3?
We commit to taking risks. There is no learning without being vulnerable and making mistakes along the way. One who is overly fearful cannot learn, and one who is overly impatient cannot teach.
Amen. Thank you. And let's see, Fred, would you be willing? Oh, I think you are muted. Hold on. Still muted.
Try the other microphone.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome.
Okay.
Go for it.
Sorry. We assume that everyone in our community has positive intentions. We will ask empathic questions rather than assume others' intentions. Let the honor of those in your community be as dear to you as your own honor. Pirkei Avot. Good Musar.
Yep, it's amazing. And Caryn, would you be willing to read number 5? Thank you, Fred.
Sure. We recognize the difference between intent and impact. It is possible to have positive intentions and still cause harm. We commit to finding ways to repair harm when we cause it. We are accountable for our mistakes and for their repair. Be like the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace, from Pirkei Avot 4:2.
Thank you. And Jeffrey, would you be willing to read number 6?
Of course. We take responsibility for our own feelings and reactions. We take care of ourselves. We also recognize that others might have strong feelings and reactions, and we commit to caring for others. All the people of Israel are responsible for one another.
Thank you. And I'll read the last one. This one is sometimes the hardest, I think, for our Jewish anxiety patterns. We expect and we accept a lack of closure. We will strive for as much safety as possible for every person in our community. We commit to calling upon our resilience and staying connected. It is not up to you to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. Pirkei Avot. Okay, so those are the touchstones that we read in every class to begin and center ourselves. And we also do a 2-minute breathing meditation to ground ourselves in our bodies. because I think it's very easy as Jews for us to like live and engage from the neck up and forget that we have like this whole embodied experience of learning. So I'm just curious, what did you notice or what came up for you in those touchstones as we were reading through them? Was there anything you noticed as interesting or curious or unusual? Or anything you liked?
I think the one I read, how like even when you try, I don't remember it 100%, but even when you try to like come to a certain place, it doesn't mean you're necessarily there. Is that what that was? I was like, oh,
Yep.
that is really true.
Yep.
It just resonated, you know.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah, Fred.
Really grateful for intent versus impact. I learned that a few years ago and have found that such a helpful phrase. And I don't even know its origin, or I've rarely seen it in print, but it's such a good covenant. Thank you.
Yep, totally agree. And actually, I love that you use the word covenant, because that's what we talk about in our first class, is that we're creating a brit with one another, which is a sacred community of, learners. Everybody's a learner and everybody's a teacher, whether we're aware of it or not. And we have a sacred responsibility to show that we care through our mitzvot. And so I redefine mitzvah as action and behavior and orientation to relationship that shows that we care about the sacred quality of this learning container that we're agreeing to participate in and build. So yeah, Jeffrey.
I love the shlemut, the wholeness of it. No single criteria works in isolation. All together, they're fine. I did have one question.
Yeah,
I was curious about the selection of people's reactions rather than people's responses. Because I worry that reactions itself is reactive and takes us out of the mode of responding to and hearing responses.
Yeah, it's just a language thing. I mean, I often ask people, like, what did you notice in reading through those touchstones? And so, sometimes people share feelings of like, I felt really uncomfortable with this idea of a lack of closure. And sometimes people respond from a more like a bria, like a more intellectual place of, it's really hard for me to listen to opinions that are different from my own because I'm always right. And we get a lot of that in the class, which is fascinating. So yeah, I think reaction and response, they're both really valid approaches. And I also ask people to notice after we read the touchstones to ground again and notice what's happening in your body. We do that like 3 or 4 times in the course of any given class. And then we also do 2 stretch breaks between our text study, like the Jewish text study, and then we have a movement break, and then the Black American text study and a movement break, and then we use some sort of spiritual modality to integrate. So, Margie, I took the JSP training, or like an intensive 3 years ago, and was profoundly influenced by it. So I use that all the time. And I ask people to just get whatever is available. And for the last 10 minutes of class, we turn on some Batya Levine and we just grok with the creativity. That's a really good nonverbal way to integrate and synthesize. And then sometimes we do an embodied, yoga practice, or we sing a nigun, but getting out of our heads and out of the text, I think, is really important as just as a teaching strategy for this course. So what I want to do now is I want to show you, hang on, I gotta get there. Okay, so this is actually where we are in the class this coming Sunday. We have gone through collective, building community. We've also explored collective harm and collective responsibility. And so the 4th week is all about the elements of tshuva and returning to a relationship of integrity and reconciliation or healing. And so I'm going to be teaching this on Sunday. of what I have created is called the tshuva process. This is influenced by Rambam, but I kind of came up with this on my own. And I think of it as a 4-stage process that is not like time delineated. Some people, when we have grievances or we've been harmed, it takes a long time. Or when we've caused the harm, which is what this particular model is assuming, is that we have caused harm, takes a long time. And it's a spiritual discernment process. So the first stage is about our own awareness of causing or benefiting from harm. And what I have observed in the first cohort is that a lot of white people, including Jews of Ashkenazi descent, have not really thought deeply about how their ancestors and they themselves have benefited from structural policies that the US government has offered to white people only. So for example, Social Security is a benefit that was created with the New Deal that was available only to white people. So the majority of Black workers at the time, who were domestics and farm workers and service workers, were excluded from enrolling in Social Security. Similarly, the GI Bill was only extended to white American veterans, not Black American veterans, because the US military was still segregated. And so a lot of people, including several of my ancestors, went to school for free or reduced tuition to start earning money and accumulating wealth. And, Jews at that time were not entirely considered white, but were certainly starting to benefit from the structures in place that allowed for assimilation. And also the FHA mortgages that contributed to white Jewish homeownership and wealth accumulation were not available to Black Americans. So developing, cultivating that awareness of the differences between interpersonal racism and segregation and then structural policies that have benefited white people is a huge learning curve for many people in our communities. And building that awareness is often super duper uncomfortable and painful, and it's consciousness raising. And so I'm on a mission to help all of our loved ones in Jewish communities to cultivate that awareness so we can catalyze our justice orientations to participate in the larger reparations movement. I think Jews have a lot to contribute to that movement, not just time, energy, and text and ideas, but also money. I think that Jews are well positioned to move the needle in terms of galvanizing communities of spirit across different religious denominations to move money into Black communities as investments for repair. Anyway, the second piece of tshuva is about what is my piece? And that is, cheshbon hanefesh, and it requires reflection and compassion and also some self-forgiveness. When we come into awareness, we often berate and lacerate ourselves. What do we get from that? Not much, except suffering. We can actually transform it into more positive, fruitful action by getting real with walking our walk in terms of anti-racism. The third part, which I think there's a lot of opportunity in Jewish communities that are multiracial, racially diverse, and then Jewish communities that are in conversation with Black communities to engage in efforts towards apology and repair and restitution, whether by learning together or becoming coalition partners on legislation or social movement protest like Black Lives Matter. Lots and lots of ways that Jewish communities might organize in relationship with communities of color as a form of repair. And then the last part of tshuva is acknowledging that when we do this work, ideally or hopefully it creates a change in relationship towards closeness and reconciliation and healing, but that's not up to us. If we are the ones who have caused harm or benefited from harm, it's really it's up to people who have been harmed. It's up to people of color whether to engage. And sometimes people do, and sometimes people don't want to. So I'm going to leave this up for a second and open it up for questions, conversation about this particular framework. And then we're almost out of time. Jesus, that went fast. So I'm curious, thoughts, comments, questions, and I see something in the chat, which I can't actually open. Okay, thank you. You're welcome. Any comments or what are you noticing in yourself or about your communities or? Yeah, Margie.
So I'm just reflecting on how much I appreciate you're putting this in such a deeply Jewish context.
Mm-hmm.
I participated in April Baskin's Whiteness Havara, Habruta,
Mm-hmm.
which was really amazing. And this adds a deep piece that is really, really helpful. I'm also wondering whether this material came out of that in any way, or I know this is a little bit more specific, but whether that work influenced what you're doing.
I haven't taken April's Whiteness Chavruta. This was kind of the culmination of a really deep dive into Sefaria on harm and Mishnah. I read Mishnah Torah a couple times. And there's other sources, from Torah and Talmud and Tanakh. I wanted to have at least, and also contemporary Jewish thinkers. So there's at least 4 texts for every section and every week from different sources. And then I've just been reading, Black nonfiction literature on Black history and reparations for a couple of years. So I wish I could have taken the Whiteness Chavruta. I didn't have time at the moment, or at the time it was offered, but I think they're offering it again. So yeah,
in the spring or something, but
yeah,
I mean, it's a much more broad take, but it was really amazing. So.
Yeah, and I know a couple other anti-racism initiatives in the Jewish community that are very different than this approach, which is fine. There's many right ways to dive into this, that are primarily focused on history, really learning history and historical narratives. And that's awesome. And it's not my area of expertise. And so there's room at the table for lots of different approaches. Amazing. So yeah, and in the last minute that we have, I just wanted to show you for this particular week, we have a text by Rambam from Mishnah Torah about obligation on the part of the person who causes harm, and forgiveness. We also have, we do have something by Danya and Erica Brown about tshuva. And I love Danya's quote here about distinguishing between atonement and forgiveness and repentance, because those are all related and part of the larger conversation about reparations, but they are distinctive. And they involve different approaches to interpersonal conversation and reconciliation. They also involve different approaches for the person who is seeking atonement or forgiveness or, tshuva. So I want to do another round of this curriculum from the perspective of, perhaps in conversation with Black Jews, or the Black activists that I'm developing pretty deep relationships with here in Denver, of what would this tshuva process look like from your perspective as a person who has experienced racial harm? Because I'm assuming this particular circle from the perspective of a white Jew. And so what would these 2 circles look like in conversation with one another? So, and then the text by Black Americans, one is by Howard Zehr. Actually, he's Jewish, and Ali Gohar is, I think he is Persian. And then Beverly Tatum, which she has this great quote about racism being on a conveyor belt, about passive racist behavior, and then active racist behavior. And then there's a really powerful quote here by Jamel Bowie, who is an amazing columnist in the New York Times, and talking about a revolution of values, and what is needed in our country to restructure it based on the values of equity and human dignity. And so there's text study questions after each kind of section of material, and I have people go into Chavruta, and then we come back and we share, and it's a wild ride. It requires a lot of movement and breathing and getting back in touch with our spirit and our body, because the intellectual content of this particular curriculum, it is heavy duty. So thank you for being here. I know we're out of time, and you are so welcome. Yeah, I need to talk to my, the dismantling racism is amazing. I'm in that facilitator training right now. So yes, I have to talk to my executive director of what do we do when people want to use this? And like, we have no structure in place for that. Sorry, I'm just being transparent. Should have thought about that. So let me get back to you. I'll, be in touch, or if you want to reach out to me to be in touch, hang on, I'm going to put my email in the chat. I'm at Caryn@judaismyourway.org, and it's Caryn with a C and a Y. And I'm happy to share it and work something out that works for your community, because I would love for more people to just engage with the material and deepen the journey. So thank you all.
Caryn, thank you so much. Its work is just really amazing. And as you were saying, it's very deep intellectually. It's also very deep emotionally. And I so appreciate the many ways that you were holding space for people to process all of that. It's really just fantastic. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It looks like we have an extra 5 minutes because we started a little bit late. So if anybody has
sure.
questions or
questions, responses, feelings.
I'm just curious who found out about and who participated in the cohorts that have happened already.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we advertised it to the Judaism Your Way community. I also publicized it to my peeps in the Aleph program, because that's where I got smicha. And we are partnered with, we've done a lot of multiracial justice stuff with a Methodist church here in Denver that is led by a Black pastor, but it's a predominantly white church, which, man, I mean, I love Ken Brown. I don't know how he does his work. Like, that's tough, being a Black pastor to well-meaning white people. So he participated in a couple folks from his church. So it was like a cross-racial and cross-religion, spiritual tradition conversation. And that was really fascinating. And in this cohort now, we have people actually from all over the country, because I guess word is just getting out through, social media. My observation, honestly, I can say this, Benenu, I'm in a recorded Zoom, but when Christians are in the class and they've never done Chavruta, they're really intimidated and wigged out by Jewish cultural assumptions that we can wrestle with the text. Like, it's really fascinating. It is not part of like that way of engaging and talking back and wrestling is not necessarily familiar to them in how they've done like Bible study in the past. So that was an interesting learning for me as a facilitator. Like, I say this in my work with Judaism Your Way participants, dalifnei mi'at omeret, like really know before whom you stand. And that applies to this setting as well. Like, really get to know people who are in the room as best you can in a Zoom setting, because not everybody shares the same degree of familiarity with text study or with Judaism. And so like, make it as accessible and inclusive as possible, and don't make assumptions about what people know or bring to the room. So hope that answered it. it was wild, that first cohort. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we are almost out of time, and please be in touch. Happy to share once I have a plan in place.